Olá a todos, sejam bem-vindos a mais um Entrevistas de Fé. Hoje estamos num lugar especial para falar com alguém ainda mais especial. Melhor dizendo, estamos para ouvir alguém muito especial. Nós estamos nos estúdios da Universidade de Andrews, em Berrien Springs, no estado do Michigan, nos Estados Unidos, e hoje poderemos ouvir o testemunho impressionante da vida do Dr. Ray Macallister, alguém que desde muito cedo perdeu a sua visão, mas isso não foi um impedimento de, ao longo da sua vida, ir procurando atingir os sonhos e que, pela graça de Deus, o conseguiu fazer. A sua história é uma história que pode servir de exemplo para muitos que julgam, por vezes justamente, que têm algumas dificuldades na sua vida. Contudo, quando nos deixamos guiar por Deus e vamos à procura de fazer o nosso melhor, sem dúvida que o Senhor nos pode abençoar neste aspecto. E é isso que nós vamos ouvir hoje do Dr. Ray Macallister. Ray, vamos poder começar talvez pela fase da infância e depois para a juventude, ao longo da vida. Como é que Deus operou na sua vida?
I don't have a lot of memories of my early childhood years. I do remember one morning when my parents bought our first color television set. My eye had a difficult time adjusting to the light, so I couldn't enjoy it at 7 in the morning, and it was really frustrating because I wanted to see my favorite children's programs and such in color. I had to wait till that afternoon to see the color TV, and it was fun then.
Como é que foi esse processo de ser tratado por médicos, ver o que é que podiam fazer pela visão, até que finalmente concluíram que iria perder a visão total?
When I was 5, the doctors realized that my left eye wasn't just no vision, but it was big, ugly, and painful, and the doctors realized that I would be better off without it. You know, the Bible says if your eye offends you, pluck it out. Well, the idea may not be to take that literally, but some of us have an inside meaning as to what that's talking about. Sometimes we have to get rid of something in our lives that's interfering with our ability to really appreciate God. And so there was a morning, cold, hungry, thirsty, 5-year-old, tired January morning in Southern California when I was taken to surgery. Of course, Southern Californians don't know anything about cold, but still cold to me. And I couldn't eat or drink because you're not allowed to have any food or water before anesthesia. So I went in and woke up a few hours later, and my left eye was missing. Of course, I understood that would happen, but still I had to get used to that. A few weeks later, I was fitted with a plastic prosthesis. Now, this is not something that you just take lightly, but back then they were using stock eyes, which is where they have a whole bunch of models of an eye and they put it in your eye socket, and if it hurts, then it's not the right one. So you try one in, and if you cry, it's wrong. Try another one. If you cry, it's wrong, and after an hour or so, you hopefully get it right. They finally found one that was right, and I was sent home with that one, and I'd have that for a few years.
No meio deste processo, também teve de aprender Braille, naturalmente.
My family knew that I could lose my right eye at any moment. One of these, like sitting on a time bomb. Like sitting on a time bomb. They could go off at any moment. So my parents began teaching me Braille, the system of feeling raised dots. It's like you have 3 dots down and 2 across in a grid, and it's depending on which dots are showing, that's the letter. It's like 1 dot in the upper left is an A, for example. I enjoy learning Braille. It's always fun learning new languages and learning codes. Actually, I don't think it was too much more difficult than learning print. People think it's really hard to learn Braille, but remember something. Print is a big jumble of lines and squiggles and dots, and in cursive, all the lines and squiggles are all hooked to each other. Braille is separate cells, 6 dots to choose from. There's only so many combinations of those. So in some ways, Braille is a lot more orderly. A lesson that Braille teaches us about God is that God is to be heard and not seen. God is the unseen, the immortal, invisible. And Braille is a language of the invisible. And often we have to feel God without our eyes, and we have to sense Him even when He is not visible. So that's just a lesson that I learned.
Na escola, foi fácil lidar com os outros colegas? Como é que os colegas reagiram?
My elementary school years were full of a lot of adventures. I could see somewhat well. Bright lights were a problem to my right eye, so I needed to wear sunglasses when I was outside. Give me the movie star effect. I could see the human face and know, okay, 2 eyes, nose, mouth, but I could not recognize somebody's face. So if somebody was being mean to me, I needed to tell the teacher what the person was wearing. And actually, at one time the teacher said, oh, okay, this person's wearing a blue shirt. Were they the one that was mean to you? I said, no, that wasn't the person, but thanks for trying. My eyes would tire easily from reading, and I had to sit with my head close to the book and use a magnifying lens. So sometimes the teachers would give me a little bit less work. I was good at a lot of my schoolwork, so often I still would understand the material. One thing I did have a difficulty with in school was relating to the other children. I was bullied a lot. And in fact, I am one of those who refers to bullying as a sin. Well, see, Jesus says, love one another. If people are being mean to each other, is that showing love? Whatever you do to the least of these, you do it unto Jesus. And so it seems to me then that bullying is a sin and it should be addressed as one. Sometimes people would call me names. Sometimes they would knock me down on the ground and throw sand in my mouth. This was first, second, and third grade. It only got worse when I was older. And sometimes people would say that, oh, this is just petty things, don't worry about it. I usually respond by asking if it is a petty thing to throw an aluminum can on the beach. Really, I mean, it's just one can. Come on, get over it. But we all know that if you throw your aluminum can on the beach, then someone else is going to throw their aluminum can on the beach, and pretty soon, you don't have a beach. You have a junkyard. And so, yeah, if someone just did one mean thing to me and that's all it was, yeah, so what? But when it happens every day, it's like being shot with a whole bunch of little tiny arrows. It eventually builds up. I did learn how to be creative and how to take care of myself. I had a problem once with some students that would steal my hat during lunchtime. I'd have it sitting next to me in the cafeteria and someone would swipe it and I'd have to have them give it back. What I started doing is I'd sit on my hat just enough to where I could feel it, but not enough to where anybody knew I was sitting on it. So they'd swipe it, I'd turn around, hey, who stole my hat? People learned really quickly that I could handle myself, at least sometimes. During this part of my life, I had to have a lot of examinations on my right eye to make sure that it was doing okay. And one of those examinations showed a cataract on the lens, or a cloud. And so I was taken into surgery for that. Now, all these examinations were done under anesthesia. No food or drinks in the morning, plan to throw up afterward. The surgery would just be more of the same, just a longer recovery. And my parents explained there was a 50% chance that I could lose my eye altogether, and I knew enough math to know what that meant. My parents got the best end of the deal, or I got the best end of the deal during the surgery because I was asleep. Finally, the word came to my parents that the surgery was a success and that I would at least have limited vision for a few more years. The school sent a tutor to help me with some of the schoolwork that I was missing. But God provided, as always. He was teaching me how to delight in Him. Soon He would be teaching me how to receive the desires of my heart.
A situação familiar e o divórcio dos pais naturalmente terão provocado algum trauma num jovem.
When I was 9, we moved to Central California. My dad was going to be a doctor. He'd just finished medical school. which is why we were in Southern California for a while. I went to a Christian school, which was nice. The other students were nice. That year, though, my parents divorced, and I went to live with my mother in Northern California with her. I'm not going to say too much about this. There's enough sad divorce stories out there that we don't need to hear another one. But just briefly, I want to say that don't tell a child that he or she is a man or woman of the house. I don't know why we comfort ourselves with that, but I was the kid. Someone thought it would be comforting. It wasn't. Mom was the man of the house, I suppose. What a child should be told is just to be nice, mind your mommy, pick her some flowers, clean the house when you're asked to, whatever. Give her hugs, pray for her. That's enough. I do remember, though, there was one night when I was really feeling sad, and I did ask Jesus to help me feel better, and I actually did start to feel more peaceful. So Jesus was looking out for me even during that time. During 5th grade, I went to live with my father, and he, being a doctor, tried me on all kinds of fancy pairs of glasses. I looked like a bug-eyed alien, but I could see the video games a little bit better. Went back to that Christian school that I liked. Dad got me this machine that would take my schoolwork and magnify it really big and put it on a TV screen, on a closed-circuit camera, so that I didn't have to slouch over to see my schoolwork. Instead, I could just sit up straight. I'd have it set up so that it would be reverse field, so that the schoolwork would appear white on a black background instead of black on a white background. I found that to be easier to see. One morning, I just could not get the camera to focus correctly. And I washed my glasses, that didn't help. Went home, and my computer screen was blurry. A day or so later, went to the doctor, and the doctor said that my eye was dying, and I was going to become blind. Now, we all talk about how tragic that is, and yeah, it does have its tragic elements. I really want to emphasize some other aspects. First of all, there was a lot going on with my family at that time, and in many ways, actually, losing my vision really wasn't a top priority in my universe with everything else I was dealing with. But I'd also like to focus on the aspects of grace that God provided in my life. I lost my vision at the end of the school year, so my teachers could just waive the rest of my schoolwork that year and figure things out for next year. A few months before I lost my vision, I had a sudden urge to relearn Braille. I learned it before, but in the divorce and everything, I let it go. But just before I lost my vision, I just wanted to relearn it again. So I was already beginning that. I'd also just discovered a really nice Christian radio station a few months earlier, and I would listen to it regularly, listen to the Bible readings, and I was really beginning to get to know God better. And so I knew God was present. I sensed His presence. So because of that, in December 12, 1987, 12/12, when I was 12, I was baptized. So still we see God was looking out for me, even in all that. My 8th grade year, I went to live with my mother again, and then had to deal with more bullying in school, at the Christian school that I went to there. And these Christians were taught by their Christian background to do Christ-like things, like blocking doors so I couldn't go through them, stealing my pants, hiding them during PE so I couldn't find them after I dressed down in his shorts. Yeah, you wonder about this Christ-like behavior we're teaching and encouraging. I wonder myself. Would have been funny the first time, but it gets old after a while. I can actually prove empirically what I learned in high school. We did this trust fall every 8th grade, where when I was in 8th grade, we did a trust fall exercise where students line up in 2 columns, and you stand between them on a ledge, and then you fall backwards, and everybody catches you. I had no trouble doing it in 8th grade. When I was in 12th grade, I knew they'd already caught me once in 8th grade, so I knew there wasn't a problem. But I couldn't do it. Intellectually, I knew they'd catch me. There was a teacher right there. I knew nothing was going to go wrong, and I knew the facts. I couldn't do it. I just got sick to my stomach. I think it's because I was too uncomfortable being around those other people that had hurt me so much. That's pretty empirical proof. That's because a lot of the things they did weren't just physical. I was publicly sexually molested by my classmates in school. You know, through my clothes, but still, it was wrong. I didn't realize as much then because it kind of got under the radar. But this is an evil that goes on in schools that people don't talk about. Well, I am talking about it because if people talk, it's not likely to happen again because people will learn. Had girls say they had crushes on me when they didn't, and they told me in front of the whole class the next day it was a joke. Do you see why I learned not to trust when I was in school? But I still graduated from high school with good marks. Went to college. College was definitely an adventure. I felt impressed to go into ministry, and the reason for that actually was because of a situation that happened in high school. One of the lonely days, we were feeding the homeless, and I just seemed that I just wasn't fitting in. And that night, I just prayed to God. I said, God, what are you trying to teach me? And I just felt God saying, talk to me. So I did that. I just talked to him for a while. Shared with him joys, sorrows, whatever was going on in my life. When I was a teenager would. I felt his presence come over me in a new way, and it was such a powerful experience that a few months later I preached on it. I was only 17 when I preached my first sermon, but I just had to tell the story. And a lot of people were touched by that sermon, so I knew that ministry was in my path. And so I went into college with a theology major, and I had no idea what was in store for me then. I would learn, though, that part of chasing dreams is learning to stand on your own in a sense of it's just God and me. Learning to trust God, learning to be creative and take charge. I had a special machine that it had a scanner that would scan over a page of text, feed that into a computer, and the computer would take those letters and pronounce them as words. So this machine would read my books to me. One day, it quit talking. And my father came up to see me and diagnosed the problem as the speech card wasn't working. So he ordered a new speech card. And in the meantime, my roommate, well, I had a roommate for a short time, got to use my computer. Well, there were some other students who were doing some reading for me. I was taking a full load. I was planning on doing it at the same speed everyone else was. And one day one of them came to me and said that she just couldn't do it anymore and that she did all she could. And I thanked her. I said, hey, that's no problem. If you did more than I would expect. And then I just said, God, this is in your lap now. Let's see what you're going to do. I went back to my dorm room, and there was a message waiting for me that my father was on his way up that very evening with the part to get my computer talking again. This is how my life was in college.
O Dr. Rey tinha como sonho ensinar, dar aulas. Como é que esse sonho começou e finalmente se concretizou?
I graduated college summa cum laude. In fact, one of the most fascinating parts of that whole thing was having to teach my mother how to pronounce summa cum laude. And then I went on to seminary at Andrews. And this started a new set of adventures because while I was learning to delight in the Lord, he was beginning to teach me how to receive the desires of my heart. And he got me through college, and the seminary was going to be another deep adventure. That one thing that was bothering me was I was looking at being $30,000 in debt when I graduated seminary. And I was uncomfortable with that. If I was going to be on a pastor's salary, I didn't see any way of paying that off. So I sat down with a prayer partner, and basically what we claimed was that if God didn't answer this problem by the end of the school year, I would drop out of seminary and choose a different career path. I believed that strongly. 2 days later, I heard from my grandmother that she had accumulated a certain amount of money from an estate that she had sold, and she was going to be distributing that among her various children and grandchildren, and the amount of money she was going to distribute to me was $30,000. I just told her to hang on to that until I graduate, let it build up interest in the bank, and then I'll tell you where to send it, and then she shut up the loan companies after I graduated by sending them the money. That was my life in seminary. Creative thinking, prayer, having to manage.
E depois de fazer essa formação, então pôde começar a colocá-la em prática.
When I finished seminary, I thought I had everything all figured out. I'd go to Loma Linda to learn to be a chaplain, and then I would be a hospital chaplain, since no one wanted me as a pastor. Well, I was also going to get a seeing eye dog, too. Well, I went down to guide dogs, and they didn't like the fact that I was moving so many times the next few months, so that fell apart. Went down to Loma Linda, and chaplaincy didn't work out. So there I was, no path, wondering what to do. And I just had 6 months to just be still and learn to be in God's presence, delighting Him even more. And that's when I felt impressed to come back to Andrews and do a PhD. So I did that. Started taking prerequisite classes. This is where I began to deal with another problem in my life. I needed a life partner, and I knew that. At first I thought that the problem was I wasn't finding one because I wasn't ready. Then it dawned on me, only fools feel ready for marriage. And so that wasn't the problem. The problem was I just didn't believe God would be nice enough to do it. So I started doing some small faith challenges. I knew I needed my faith to grow. So I just said in the summer of the year 2000, well, God, would you please give me one 2-hour conversation with somebody today? And I checked my watch after the conversation, and it was 2 hours. And these were with total strangers. This was a summer on a college campus. There's not a lot of people there, and nobody that I know, so that's not just likely to happen. I kept asking maybe for a 2-hour conversation with 2 people, or a conversation with a female. Let's get a little closer here. Finally, after all those were happening, I was impressed to say, okay, God, I claim that by Christmas of this year, I'll be in a deep relationship with the person I'm supposed to marry. And 2 weeks before Christmas, there's this woman named Sally I was getting close to, and she told me that she loved me. And, well, gotta take this seriously. We have a lot in common. She's older than me, but it's not a problem. So we started dating. 9 months later, we were married. Now, relationships are a very different thing with someone with a disability, because often that partner ends up filling gaps in our lives that are just hanging there. I mean, when I was in college, I had a girlfriend for a year. We'd go running together. We went doing literature evangelism together during the summer. These were things I couldn't just do by myself. So having someone with me allowed me to experience worlds that otherwise weren't available to me. And then when we broke up, I suddenly was back to the way things were before. So relationships are very important, especially when someone has a disability. And so Sally would sometimes pick me up and give me a ride to class in the winter. Actually, she started cooking most of my meals. In fact, because of that, I didn't have to eat at the cafeteria anymore. So Sally and I were married on September 13, 2001. And if anybody wants to do their math, They'll figure out very quickly that that was 2 days after 9/11, which meant that none of our families could come to the wedding, except somebody who drove up. So we had to reorganize the wedding party 2 days before the wedding. Only terrorists would realize all the lives they were messing up when they blow up buildings. Of course, the tragedy in New York was way worse than what I went through, but still, I always like to joke about that reality. Well, then I had a PhD to do. Now, a PhD involves 3 phases: coursework, comprehensives, and dissertation. Now, the state government had offered to pay for my tuition and equipment for my PhD, so I didn't have to worry about that. I had students, some of my fellow students in classes were audio taping things, like somebody audio taped all the words, the vocabulary words in a Hebrew class. Had a teacher that wrote the German textbook for theological German, and he wrote the textbook and gave it to me on a disc so I could read it off my computer. But there's still things I needed even more than that. There are these symbols in the Hebrew Bible that tell you how to sing the text, how to chant the text, and they're important for syntax, technical things. They're things that doctoral Hebrew nerds need to know. And I didn't have access to this. I did have some software that had the Hebrew Bible on it that I could read somewhat, but it didn't have these fancy symbols. So I went out looking for some computer nerds that maybe could help me with something. And I found the Center for Computer Analysis of Texts in the University of Pennsylvania. They had the whole Hebrew Bible with all the technical symbols. It was coded kind of weird, but they sent me some samples, and I said, yeah, I can do this. So they sent me a bunch of documents for just $10, and it's good stuff, especially if you can't see otherwise. And when the state of Michigan found out that I was using these technical computer documents, they purchased for me a laptop with a Braille display on it so that I could read the text in a form of Braille code. It would have like magnetic pins that would pop up like dots. It would be like synthetic Braille. And I could read these computer code documents with my fingers this way. And I was able to use those all throughout my PhD, even during comprehensives. So I finished my coursework, and it was taking comprehensives, and that was another adventure, because everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And one time, we got a flat tire on the way to one of the comps. Another time, I was sick, and I had to take the 2 weeks of comps, lying on the floor some of the time in the examining room, and then during lunch, I would just curl up on the floor and take a nap for an hour and a half. The advantage of doing that is everyone else comes back tired, and I have my second wind. But God provided the 1 day a week for 5 weeks of exams, 6 hours for those days. It was over in 5 weeks, and I passed. I didn't need to do any makeup oral exam. And sometimes if you don't do well on one of the tests, they give you a little oral exam. I didn't have to do any of that. Then I was ready to write my dissertation. I wrote my dissertation on blindness in the Hebrew Bible. No one else had touched it. And Sally read some, actually she read a lot for my dissertation, things that wouldn't scan into my computer. Looked at a lot of interesting stuff. One thing I think that was really interesting, because it's so off the wall, is we found, I was given a tip-off by one of the University of Chicago professors to look up a word in ancient Akkadian, similar to Hebrew, kind of similar to Hebrew, and looked at this word, and I found a reference to these Babylonian boundary stones. And this is like really nerdy, but Sally and I were just so fascinated with what we got a whole book of them. You know, we were reading one afternoon in the library, boundary stones all afternoon, and they would all say the same thing. If anyone causes a blind, deaf, or stupid person to remove the stone, may the gods curse that person who made the blind person do that. You wouldn't curse the blind person, you curse the person who deceived the blind person, all right? Well, it's interesting that they had enough of a concern someone would do that back then. Well, that definitely made it into my dissertation, and still to this day, Sally and I talk about that as being one of the more interesting parts of my dissertation. And we spent about an hour reading these. Finally, I'm like, okay, honey, I think we've read about enough of these. We've read about 30 of them. Maybe skip to the back of the book. Are they still saying that? Yeah, okay, pick a random page. Does it still say that? Yeah, all right. Okay, well, fine. This is cool. Well, after you write the dissertation, you have to defend it. And what they do is they'll have the 3 professors that are on your dissertation committee, a 4th reader from the campus, and then a 5th person that I'd never met before ask me questions. And about 5 of them were asking me questions to see if I could defend the topic. And they about pushed me until I just about couldn't go anymore. But I answered all the questions. We took a break. They came back a few minutes later and said that they'd accepted it with just a few minor revisions. Made those revisions in about a couple days' time. And that set me up to graduate in August of 2010. And I would be the first blind person on the planet to completely earn a PhD in Hebrew Bible. The trouble is, there wasn't work waiting for me afterward, at least it wasn't work in teaching. And it was really a difficult struggle. I interviewed with lots of organizations for jobs in teaching and ministry. And honestly, there's a lot of prejudice out there. And one person actually had the honesty to ask me how a blind person would manage in ministry, and I thanked him for his honesty, and I told him, okay, would you please give me 3 examples of things that you don't think that a blind person would do well, and I will tell you how I have either done them, or I will contact a mentor who is blind, and he will tell me what to tell you. 3 emails later, I still never heard from the person. And if he really wanted to find out, I think he would have responded to one of those. One organization leader sat in his office. He just slumped back in his chair, according to my wife, who saw what was going on, and kind of with this attitude in his face, like, okay, when's this going to be over? He didn't ask me any questions much, maybe 1 or 2 at the beginning. I would just keep filling in the silences by volunteering about how God had used me to pull these people away from suicide, led this person to baptism, all these things. And I knew I wasn't going to get a job with that person. So my graduation had kind of a dark halo over it. In the middle of this time, I was impressed to memorize the book of Psalms in Hebrew. Figured it would help my Hebrew, and also it would be comforting. I did find the idea of being honest with God and saying, God, why have you forgotten me? And the Psalms do that. Psalm 13, how long will you forget? It's okay to pour out your heart and to petition, ask God for help. Then you always have to put a little bit of praise in it, no matter what. And I would pray these Psalms as my own during the last part of my PhD and even beyond then. And doing this really did get me through. I really felt God's presence. Didn't necessarily get me a job in teaching right away, but at least give me a sense of His presence. Well, after I graduated, I got a small job doing some part-time work for Christian Director Services for the Blind as a representative. I would be going through cities, leaving coin boxes and businesses where they could put money. Yeah, there's a job for a PhD. I did enjoy especially preaching in area churches, telling my life story and preaching about disabilities. That was a lot of fun. But after about a year of this, I knew this wasn't going to be my life's path. I wasn't bringing in very much money. I knew it wasn't going to last very long. I needed to do something that would produce more steady income. So in 2012, I went to massage therapy school. God blessed here too, because there was a $100 registration fee. There was a friend of mine, I'd given him some amateur massage, and a couple weeks before I registered for the massage school, he was impressed to just give me $100. I didn't even know I was going to be going to the school at that time. I didn't know what the registration fee would be, but that's what it was. And so I started school, and within a year, I was certified as a massage therapist, already getting my business going. And 3 months after I was done with school, I took the licensing exam and became a licensed massage therapist. And I found the most fascinating thing when I was in massage therapy school. See, when I was doing my PhD, I tried learning medical transcription, figuring maybe if I learn a trade, that will give me some options. Well, I'd done so much typing in my life that all the typing of medical transcription was ruining my wrists and my fingers. I was having too much pain. So I had to quit that after a month. which is frustrating for the hospital I was working for and frustrating for me, especially because, like, God, what gives? I mean, I can't even learn a trade. Well, I was worried that this would be a problem in massage school because I'd be using my hands a lot. And they still hurt once in a while, even starting at massage school. But I had a weekend where I gave a couple of volunteer massages to some friends, and one of them wanted it really, really, really deep. I thought after this, okay, here go my hands. Got up the next morning and my hands felt looser than they had in months. I think the idea is that the hand was not designed for peck, peck, peck typing, but for squeezing and grabbing and working the clay of the earth. Massage would be working the clay of God's creation, shall we say. So I actually found then that I was finding healing by giving healing, which is a powerful lesson.
No fim desta experiência, sente que Deus o deixou concretizar estes sonhos todos?
God had many more dreams to fulfill in my life. I was beginning to do some distance education teaching for Andrews University. It started out small, but when they found out I had a Master of Divinity degree, like, you have an MDiv degree? We need you to teach a bunch of classes. We had a situation come up, and we're desperate. It's like, sure, fine, hand them over. But while I was doing all that, it was in the year 2014, I realized that I was getting close to turning 40, and I didn't have any kids, and I wanted to experience the miracle of birth. And I didn't know how that was going to happen, but my wife and I found on the internet a program for massage therapists to become birth doulas. Now, doula comes from the Greek word doule, which refers to a maidservant. And a doula is usually a woman who assists in childbirth. If a delivery room were an airplane, the midwife or obstetrician would be the pilot, and the doula would be the flight attendant. And it brings you your juice, gives you blankets, things like that. And we're looking over the description, and I'm like, well, I don't see why a blind person couldn't do that. I had to assist in 3 births. I contacted the Institute of Somatic Therapy that was doing the program, and they agreed to let me take the program for free if in exchange I would develop a way so that a blind person could do it after me. I would take all the technical material they would have and all the videos, and I would have someone go through them with me, and I would describe them using proper medical terminology. You can describe any bodily motion with technical terminology, and it works just fine. So I would do that. Well, the first part of it was doing 2 pregnancy massages. That was easy, finding volunteers for that, to receive pregnancy massages, but then I had to find 3 births to assist in. Well, I learned real quickly that no one in the area churches even knew what to do with a blind male birth doula. So I did what Jesus said to do: go to the highways and the byways and bring in the poor and the blind and the lame and so on and so forth. The interpretation of that was to call the area homeless shelter. When I was doing my massage training, I needed to do some infant massages, and I called the homeless shelter then because I knew they were usually bursting with infants. Went down there, did a couple infant massages. That finished the requirement for that. Didn't have to hunt any more people down. Well, so I called the homeless shelter, said I'm becoming a birth doula. I'd like to find some women that are pregnant, and I'll assist in their birth for free, and they'll help me experience the miracle of birth. And within about 6 weeks of that, I had 1 client ready, and then she referred another person to me at the shelter, so I had 2 births, and then that friend referred someone else to me. And within a 6-week period of time, I assisted in 3 births. And got to make a difference for the homeless. See, God doesn't like tourists. If you want to learn something, God's going to say, well, learn it and make a difference for people at the same time. And it was just exciting being part of the miracle of birth. In one birth, the doctor even let me feel the placenta, which I'd never seen one of those before. I mean, a blind person doesn't learn that stuff on TV. We don't see the TV. So I had rubber gloves on to let me feel the placenta. It was awesome being able to hear the baby's first cry, but also being able to make a difference. I mean, the doula is right there. I mean, the woman is pushing, you're holding the person's legs, to helping steady her while she's pushing. I mean, I'm right there. I know everything that's going on in the room. And I got to see an aspect of God's power of creation. And it was just an amazing experience to be part of that. So God actually enabled me to fulfill that dream. And I've assisted in 6 births total now. I don't know how many more I'm going to do, but I'm here if anyone needs me. Well, in 2015 and 2016, things started taking an interesting turn in the academic front. There was a group of people that was working with Duxbury systems. Duxbury is a computer program that takes text material and converts it into a system of Braille so that it can read correctly by blind people. Either if they want to print it on a Braille printer or an embosser or use a Braille display, Duxbury will take all kinds of languages and convert it into Braille. And yes, they will do Portuguese. And I was working with a team to make biblical languages more accessible. There was a Sarah Blake LaRose, who was a Braille transcriber, and a Matt Yater, who was the president of the National Federation of the Blind Michiana chapter in the United States of America. And we were all biblical scholars, and we were all trying to make these texts available. And so I would contribute. I did some work with the accents in Hebrew, because after my PhD, I wanted to make Braille accessible, these Braille files I had accessible to the blind, and the computer code that I was using wasn't good enough. So I learned Braille Hebrew, and since I didn't have a system to do it, I manually used Microsoft Word using search and replace to set up Braille Hebrew with accents, all the technical documents. I ended up doing about 40,000 pages of material. So by the time Matt and Sarah got in touch with me with Duxbury, I'd done a lot of stuff already. And we were just doing some finishing touches on those, some tweaks on another language called Syriac. I started working on Coptic, which is another ancient language, or an ancient modern Egyptian, well, it's the Egyptian of Jesus' day, shall we say. Late Egyptian is what they were to call it. Making that accessible. And it was a lot of fun, and we were set it up so the Duxbury could now have a language profile for the Bible. And so any biblical scholar could take a Greek or Hebrew document, as long as it's in what they call Unicode, which is a type of text on a computer. Duxbury would convert it into Braille. Well, Matt Yater decided to send an essay about this to the National Federation of the Blind in 2016. They have this Jacob Lawton Award named after Jacob Lawton, who was the first totally blind medical doctor in America. He was a heart and lung doctor, and he could listen to lungs just as easily as anybody else could. Early 20th century. And Matt sent in an essay about us with our work in biblical languages, and I kind of thought, okay, yeah, we had nothing to lose, go ahead. Well, a couple months later, I get a call from Matt saying we won first prize. I was a bit amazed. I mean, NFB is not known for particularly being a religious organization, though they're not antagonistic. There is a faith forum that meets at their meetings every year. So I had a trip suddenly planned to Orlando, Florida in July of 2016 to be one of these 3 people to receive the top prize in the Jacob Lawton Awards. And Sally couldn't go with me, so it was flying by myself, meeting up with a blind man, trying to find the blind man to meet up with at the Rose and Shingle Creek Hotel in Orlando, Florida. The hotel, by the way, had been taken over by about 3,000 blind people, white canes, dogs. I finally found a friend who had someone at the desk contact him, and someone from the desk led me up to the room. And then from there, I'd be taking care of myself. And Matt and Sarah and them, they made sure I got where I needed to go. The next day for the award, it was actually kind of funny because they were playing the victory music at the end of Star Wars A New Hope just before they gave out the awards. And I was up there and received the award and thanked everybody and thanked God for making this possible and thanked my wife for supporting me through it all. And that night we all went to the banquet at the NFB. And Matt had to leave early, so I didn't have anybody to walk with me back to the room. Yeah, I know Matt was blind, but he at least had more experience with the NFB, knowing how to navigate. I decided, I just won an award for making things accessible to the blind. I really should do this walk by myself. So I'm like, okay, Matt, go back up to the room. That's okay. I will take care of myself. After the banquet, left the room and started walking down the hall. I got a little disoriented, so I started pacing back and forth, and an attendant saw what I was doing and said, do you need any help? Like, yeah, I need to go where they're taking our pictures. Took the picture, and then after that, I just started following the crowd, and they had an escalator marshal that would help how to get on the escalator, which I could hear the escalator, but still I at least followed the marshal, and he said, okay, you can get on now. So I grabbed the rail and stepped on, and then got off and walked down, kept following the crowd. There's always some attendants selling things, whatever, and even 11 o'clock at night, there's always people out there. So I said, okay, is this the right direction to the elevator? Like, yes. Okay, keep going. There's a long line in the elevator, but finally I got on. And I always went nearest the button, so I punched all the buttons so the elevator would stop at every floor, which with that many people in the elevator, it's actually easier to do that than to say, okay, anyone first, anyone second, anyone third. You just push all the buttons, and, well, if no one's getting off, tough luck. I followed the braille on the walls down the hall, walked into my hotel room using the hotel key, and everyone else was asleep, though I think they woke up when I came in. But I made it by God's power. The money from the award I used toward the down payment on a house. We claimed by faith last year that God would enable us to buy a house. We didn't know where we were going to get the down payment money, but God provided. So now we have our own home, and we have no idea where this is going now. All I know is that God will fulfill your dreams. As Psalm 37:4 says, delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. And the Hebrew word for delight is a very exquisite word. It's the word used for the delight of the Sabbath in Isaiah 58. In Song of Solomon, it's used to describe the delight of the bride. And the verb form of this is what you see in Psalm 37. So it's like to exquisitely enjoy the Lord. He will give you the desires of your heart. Now, desires there gives you the idea. The word desires gives you the idea in the Hebrew of requests, what your heart is asking for. Delight in the Lord, and He will give you what your heart is truly asking for. It may not be what you think you want, but it is what your heart is most deeply desiring. God will give that to you.
Em resumo, o que poderá dizer do seu testemunho de vida àqueles que estão a assistir?
And that's my message to you, is look for your dreams. The problem we find in life, we dream small, we ask small, we believe small, and we wonder why God answers small. Dream big, and God will answer big.
A história de vida que nós ouvimos certamente que impressiona qualquer um. Mas mais do que impressionar qualquer um, pode dar-nos a certeza de que quando Deus comanda a nossa vida, as dificuldades começam a perder valor e tornam-se elas um motivo para lutarmos ainda mais e nos esforçarmos ainda mais para que Deus possa atuar na nossa vida. Que o testemunho do Dr. Macallister possa ser uma motivação e um incentivo para todos aqueles que assistiram. Até mais.